Welcome to Canada Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance. We organize critical and courageous conversations about local and global issues connected to equity, fairness, and social justice. These conversations are organized so that they can facilitate critical consciousness for anybody who questions about the structural oppression, inequality, and injustice in the world so that we can become a more kind and compassionate global citizens. One of the things that we understand in today's world that without thinking critically, without understanding how the world functions, it is very hard for us to become kind and compassionate global citizens. So our goal of these conversations is that how we can start to understanding things that are probably not very obvious. So my today's guest is Ellen Hansson, a human rights activist from all the way from Sweden, Gothenburg. I'm not sure if I pronounced the name Gothenburg properly. um, so I'm looking forward to having a conversation of Ellen's engagement with human rights activism, and particularly I don't know how to if I'm pronouncing it properly. Um, the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. Is that how you
Yeah,
say that?
that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen, for joining us. Thank you very much. I know that you had to rush from work, to join our conversation. Thank you very much for making some time for us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ellen, the first question to you is that could you tell us about yourself, where you're from, about your upbringing, and how did you get involved into human rights, activism?
Yeah, so I am from Gothenburg originally, and I also live here now. I've been living in different places. I've been brought up in a very, I would say, a very comfortable environment. Have parents and family who are very conscious and aware. I've always been, around people with kind of left wing thoughts and socialistic view on society. So it's sort of been, it hasn't been that far of a step for me to get involved this actively. I have a very varied background. I've studied music. I've been doing music for some years. I've been traveling a lot, living abroad. And what actually got me here to the activism that I'm doing today is I was living in London for 5 years, doing music, and then I decided to move back, and a lot of things just connected when I moved back to Gothenburg, because there was elections and the right wing movements have grown a lot in Sweden. We've had 40 years of socialism here, very a very very good socialistic system, strong and caring for the people. And then I started to see this right wing movements growing. So I started to get politically involved, and that led me to the Palestine Movement. 2014, one of the latest big attacks on Gaza. 40 refugees in Sweden, in my city, Gothenburg, were left in such a bad situation that they decided to go on a hunger strike. So, I went there and spoke to them and asked how I could get involved. So me and a group of activists started to get engaged to support them. And so they were on a hunger strike for quite a while. Some of them were really bad health-wise and psychologically. Some of them had been in Sweden for 8 years without getting any answers on their asylum applications. So it was really heartbreaking to see people in my hometown, which I've always seen as a safe place, see people struggle like that. So yeah, we did what we could, and it was amazing and very empowering to see people come together like that and actually trying to make a difference. So that's how I got in contact with Ship to Gaza, which is the Swedish campaign, which is part of the International Freedom Flotilla Coalition. So I've been engaged there since 2014-15. And, you know, when you're starting to deal with human rights issues like that, you know, it's natural that you get involved in the refugee issue, refugee welcome, which was active in 2015 when a lot of refugees fled to Europe, and, you know, just many different issues like that. So that's in short how I got involved.
Thank you, Ellen. So you were detained by Israeli military in 2018 on international water, and then you were also imprisoned in Israel. Could you? So as I started in the beginning of our conversation, is that a lot of young students, a lot of them from Bangladesh, would actually engage, will watch this conversation now and also later, to engage in critical consciousness building work, understanding the entire world, its interconnectedness, how what happens in what parts of the world is also connected to all parts of the world. Of course, in a capitalistic, colonialistic world, you know, there is no way that we can. So could you tell us about that incident, that what happened in 2018?
Yeah, so the Freedom Flotilla is a large network which has sort of I like the way we work because we have one specific goal, and that is to break the illegal blockade on the Gaza Strip from the sea. So we basically raise money, fundraise to buy boats, which we sail, usually from Scandinavia all through Europe, and with the goal to reach the Gaza Strip from the sea. So I've been on 3 of those boats, and this time we were actually 3 boats that were leaving to go to Gaza. One unfortunately had to stop before reaching, but we were 2 boats, and so this from the beginning, our boat Freedom sailed all the way from Sweden, stopping in different ports on the way. So this takes, you know, quite a lot of time. It was also a sailing boat, quite small. So, you know, but the idea is to raise awareness and raise the, you know, consciousness and opposition, and shed light on what's really going on in Gaza to the Palestinians. So, yeah, so we left Italy with our boat, and before us there had been another boat a fishing vessel, which was aimed to give to the Palestinian fishermen in Gaza, because they are very deprived of their rights to fish in their own waters. And our boat was carrying medical equipment. So we were sailing a few days apart, and so we set sail to Gaza harbor. And, you know, it's not really, you know, people accuse us for romanticizing activism a little bit. It was not a very pleasant trip at all. It was in the middle of the Mediterranean, in the middle of the summer, you know, 30, 40 degrees hot, we weren't showering, we were sleeping in shifts. We were just basically doing, our part to get the boat there. So it's really, you have to be very united as a group. You have to be very, believe in the same things very strongly, and that is that our goal is to reach Gaza, and there's no other options. So we all did our parts. The engine broke down. The food ran out. It was so when we were reaching Gaza, we were captured about 40 nautical miles from Gaza, and so Israel is imposing a sort of restricted military zone around, on international waters. So we were captured on international waters, which means that they are breaking international law, first of all, by stopping us. Second of all, they are occupying the Palestinians' own fishing water, so they have no access to what's theirs. So we have experience from this. We've been sailing many times before with different kind of boats, with different people from all over the world. So we were ready for them to approach us, and we had a really well experienced, great captain on board who was dealing with the Israeli Navy, and and so the whole process starts. We continued on our track, and they kept telling us to turn around. You're not allowed, and if you don't turn around, we will forcibly take over the boats. So then what happens is that they cut off our connection. So we can't have any contacts with the people in Sweden and so on. And then
Ellen, when you mean that they cut off your connection,
our satellite phones and things, and then so to make it more uncomfortable, they waited until it was dark, so it would be harder for us to navigate. And then, imagine a tiny sailing boat with 12 peace activists, because that's all that we are. We are peace activists. We stand for human rights, for the liberation of the Palestinians. We only bring medical equipment and a boat. And they came, surrounded us with 15, 16 military ships in the late at night when it was dark. So and we have nothing to hide. We have nothing more than our conviction and our message and our goal. So then they took over the boats, and they towed us to Ashdod in Israel, where we were captivated and imprisoned. And the boat obviously then was stolen and taken over by them. So
So in terms of, there are a lot of games with language when a lot of the representation of Israel and Palestine is shown as a conflict not as an occupation. That Israelis and there are a lot of people, and obviously, and this is so. I was just telling you moments ago that my doctoral dissertation, I am looking into how different computational means are used to create political polarization and science denial. So, like for example, you will see that people denying climate change, or people denying something that is happening for real. I saw a few reports in on different credible news sources that when the Israelis were raiding Palestinian places, they were bombing, they were indiscriminately killing women, children, and elderly people. When you are trying to use different means, for example, you're trying to use social media, you are trying to use, and when you're trying to upload it, and obviously we have to remember that the exponential technologies like artificial intelligence, natural language processing, they have a capacity to understand that these contents are connected to Israeli occupation, brutalization of Palestinians. They get blocked. And anybody with a bit of knowledge in algorithmic justice and understanding algorithmic bias will understand that how these things are actually happening. To be very honest, I was at the beginning of this conversation, I was thinking that when I'm writing this post, that I will have a conversation with Ellen Hansson, I knew very well that the moment I write the word, Palestinians, Gaza, when I talk about, because, your videos are well analyzed, right? So I was thinking, how, when you were actually captured and detained and you were in prison, what did you understand about Israeli occupation or militarization or imprisonment that you had no idea before actually going there?
That's a very interesting question. And this is a very interesting topic that you're talking about, because this is always, it's always a very unknown area that you're, into, and it's also about the narrative and things like that. And I don't like to, I mean, our focus is to draw attention to us, and through us, on the Palestinians. So it's an experience that is kind of difficult to share, really big, because it's very surreal. What I understood was that the Israeli occupation force is much more, how can I say? I've only heard about it, and now I saw it firsthand. If you imagine the sort of the resources that they have, we were 12 people, and they had built in the harbor a whole tent, like massive tents. So many different stops with, so much employees in there, which was interrogating us, doing different kind of checkups. I mean, this is a massive, massive system that, they spend so much resources on turning the narrative to their favor. Also, it was interesting because I had a chat with a few of the guards, just to hear their side of the story, and it's really clear that we're looking from two different angles. Obviously, but I had no idea it was that. It was that strong, like really, really, really. If you live in Israel, if you're brought up in Israel, which I've never been, by the way, you live in a different world. And also the media that is shared a lot of the time is sharing that kind of view, because it's talking, as you said, it's talking about a conflict. I've read a few courses earlier this year about conflicts in the Middle East, and it's always talking about the conflict, but it's not really. We never talk about a conflict, and we're really very specific with what kind of terminology we use, because that sort of directs, the message a lot. We don't talk about Israeli Defense Force. We talk about occupation force, because that's what it is. They're not defending themselves. They are occupying and oppressing, and it's really important. And I think what is important to do is to get as many tools as possible to actually use words, terminology, use social media, and a lot can be done, but it's really a persistent, very long-term job. The flotilla was supposed to sail once, and now, more than 10 years later, we're still continuing to sail, and we're planning a new flotilla as soon as the pandemic has lifted. So, yeah.
I do recognize your sincerity, and I do understand that you want to draw attention on the Palestinians being brutalized by Israeli military. And you see, when I was having a conversation just a few days ago with a professor who has been studying the philosophy and psychology of dehumanization for nearly 4 decades. And he was born in a Jewish family. So I asked him this question, is that how come people that have been persecuted for so long, Jewish people, how come they become such mindless brutalizer, when they're brutalizing Palestinians? And I have to be very, very mindful and careful, and also recognize that I have many Jewish friends in Canada, in the United States, in different parts of the world, who are actively working for the rights of the Palestinians. I want to make it sure that Israeli government is different. It's a very common strategy that if you say anything about Israel, oh, you're an anti-Semite. So it's very easy, that tricky game. For example, we're having this, as I said, that this conversation will be heard, reheard, used for educating. Ellen, we don't get to understand Israeli occupation firsthand. The history is very calculated. It is very carefully, curated. You said something very important just moments ago, that you were there, and the only tool you had, the only means you had there with 12 people were your conviction. Now, the IDF members also stand there with their conviction. I know of IDF, members, defected members, who have talked about that when they were growing up in Israel, the kind of brainwashing, the kind of indoctrination that they have gone through. Without that kind of indoctrination, you cannot possibly. I have seen videos, and I don't look away from them, that where Palestinian women shot and standing there, the IDF members standing there until they bleed to death. You and I are talking at a time we are seeing the Western occupation consequences in Afghanistan right now. Right now. Yeah. It's like literally we're saying what happened in Vietnam, what happened in Afghanistan, and it's almost like we're suffering some kind of historical dementia. It's like, amnesia, historical amnesia, is that we don't remember. We don't remember. Yeah. So you growing up in Sweden, I'm sure it wasn't easy, or probably it's not very available to all people in Europe or all Swedish or what have you to get to know this, right? So I don't think you get this question asked very often. In the process of I know it's not about you, but I want you to speak to that, please, to give us an insight into the knowledge so that we can, because we don't have many references. In the process of detention, imprisonment, and the journey from Sweden to Gaza, what have you learned about yourself that you did not know before that gave you a tool to understand our shared humanity with those who are the oppressor and the oppressed?
Wow, that's a that's a big, deep question. Wow. So something that I'm struggling with is this and maybe it's not relevant, but it's about privilege. So as a holder of Swedish citizenship, a Swedish passport, the way people see me, they see me as a privileged person. And I'm so aware of that fact. I mean, we were just talking about India, where I spent some time. I mean, it's crazy. And I always wanted to use it to use the benefits of it to actually do things that others can't. I mean, if Palestinians would go on the boats, we couldn't, we can't really take responsibility for them while we're imprisoned, and they would get treated in a totally different way. I mean, it's hard to say what I've learned in that kind of way, but so one interesting thing is that when we were imprisoned, obviously the whole throughout the whole process, they tried to send us back as quickly as possible, because then there would be no media, they would have no hassle, no, it would be over as quickly as possible. And what we try to do is we try to stay there longer, because then we accumulate more time for the media to respond, for our authorities in Sweden, for example, to take action, to react. So I was telling them all the time, I don't want to be deported to Sweden. I want to be deported to Gaza, because that's where I was going. So why I'm here? They call us illegal, that we've entered illegally in Israel, but we never wanted to go to Israel. We always wanted to go to Gaza. That's the whole point. So it becomes kind of ridiculous, the whole process. And this whole, working against the clock, trying to be creative, you have to, when you have, no tools, no nothing, you're in there, you have to be creative and come up with different ideas. We were also not, we were put in cells with others, so we were separated, men and women, and we sort of had this part of the prison where they put us activists, so there were signs of free Gaza and things. But no, I mean, I think I don't know if it's something I learned, but I feel very humble, and I feel very privileged that I have this experience, because then I can talk about it, seeing firsthand how they treat activists, and how they treat if you compare that to how they treat Palestinians. I don't know if that was an answer. But
I asked that question I was reading a book where an American young woman shares her experience in Middle East. That there were two young women. were experiencing a lot of anger, frustration expressed by the Middle Easterns. Mind you that these angers and frustrations are rooted in, American foreign policy of, devastating, literally decimating Middle Eastern. Um, mm, at that moment, that woman had a realization where she's saying is that for the first time she realized that how people in places where they are dehumanized, how do they feel? They were under, so she was writing that even people who are yelling at her, she was able to see for the first time a shared humanity that, it's not essentially that woman per se that they were yelling at, right? Um, I mean, you were from a country um, like Sweden, and I have written about it, about Greta Thunberg. I'm from Bangladesh. Um, Nearly 20 million people in Bangladesh live under extreme danger because of climate change. And I'm hopeful and humble that Greta does what she does. She goes to United Nations. She is able to hold many head of the states accountable. At least can tell them that, I mean, we all are aware about, Greta's famous speech that, you tell us, we grew up hearing these fairy stories of endless growth. You're lying to us. I couldn't help but contextualize it that will the United Nations give equal recognition to young girls like Greta in Bangladesh that are millions in number? Will the United Nations or the Western world be respectful towards young girls who are being sold to sex work, prostitution, because climate change and these families that, and this is a report, by the way, it's not my own statement. It is a report that came out in 2019 by UNICEF. So I am happy that she is, like, just a moment ago you said that, yeah, you knew that you staying there longer, Swedish authority will need to do something because you hold a Swedish passport, um, and that's Swedish citizenship. I'm trying to be very, very careful, and also be very mindful in terms of how I phrase it. Um, did you feel at any point unsure? I mean, as I just a moment ago said that, had it been any, Palestinian woman, they would be comfortably shot and dead. There are many, 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 many examples like that. In that process, did you at any point in time think that Swedish authorities, your government will take necessary measure to ensure your safety, or you felt like, oh, I thought they would respond faster? I mean, the whole point that your confidence on Swedish authorities, did it prove fruitful, or you were disappointed in some ways?
Yeah, I was very disappointed because it feels continuously as it's just something. They say things to calm it down. They say that we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. A lot of the times, without being a political expert here, it feels like Swedish leaders just try and say things that would please the crowd, and say, they talk a lot, but they do very little, especially when it comes to the refugee issue, which I'm very which is very close to my heart, and it's disappointing over and over again. And it was very interesting because my experience when we were in prison was that we were allowed a meeting with our ambassador, our embassy. So there were two ambassadors there taking our statements, and then that was it. So we gave them our information about our experience, which they were obliged to report back to Sweden. But then nothing happened. And they assured us that we were, you can call us. They gave us their card. And they said, just give us a call. And we were like, okay, yeah, but we don't have a phone in the cell. It was ridiculous. So yet again, it felt like, it was just something they had to do, and it was over and done with, and that was it, So, and our organization in Sweden is really, consistently approaching them, writing letters, open letters in media, organizing meetings at the parliament to get answers. But, the answers are, none, or if there are, they're extremely vague. And it feels like, that's
political language.
Yeah, political language. Yeah, just, oh my God. And, Sweden recognized Palestine in 2014. And then what happened, nothing has happened. Nothing, tangible has happened to Palestinians in Palestine, or for that sake, in the diaspora. There are people that can't visit their families in their home country because they're not allowed. So if this is not, apartheid, oppression, depriving people of their basic human rights, that, it's and I mean, that's also, where media plays its role. We're getting like, it's getting, so, well, I'm getting sick of just seeing, okay, a small, note, yeah, there's been bombings in Gaza, and that's it. There's nothing really more to it. It's just interesting when there are attacks, and yeah, and I mean, I guess that, it's the narrative that is, who owns media, who controls media, and that's why it's really so important. And I mean, that's why your work is so important, and everyone who is, conscious enough to try and go outside of the mainstream media, and that's what we have to do, continue to doing.
Now, speaking of media, though, I mean, and this is exactly the point, that it was a long time ago, not 1 day or 2 days ago, that when Chomsky wrote about manufacturing consent. So the question is that the Swedish people, what do they get to see? Now, you're talking about Palestine, you're talking about people in Gaza. I think we have received it. Let us know when you are planning to visit Gaza again. I am assuming that Rakib is from Gaza. And we have Abir from Bangladesh. Is that utmost respect to all those brave hearts like Ellen. And I'm very happy to see this. Is that Shati Khondokar? I can say from the name is that this person is from Bangladesh. Is that she's from Sweden, and she knows you personally, which makes me feel very happy. Is that in understanding solidarity, understanding different. Now, speaking of media, and you have mentioned that when you were in you were detained, you wanted to prolong your stay so that media attention can you can draw media attention. But the point is, how are we going to draw media attention? If you look at the history of media, the capacity Israel has proved to be able to silence media around the world is astonishing. It wasn't until very recently in the United States where people came out and said, I can speak about Israeli occupation and I don't necessarily have to be an anti Semite. People like Chomsky has been speaking about the rights of Palestinian people for nearly 40, 50 years. He was born in a Jewish family.
Yeah.
If you talk about, I was just telling you about moments ago about, I have Jewish friends in Canada who are member of parliaments who are giving statements about Palestinian people. So in terms of talking about media, look at what's happening right now in Afghanistan. Right now, what is happening in Afghanistan? What is getting media attention? You and I are kind of betting on a platform. You see, social media is a media. It is the largest printing press that has ever existed in the history of humanity. But the algorithm of social media, you and I don't know it. You and I do not know that what is the proprietary algorithm, what do they do in terms of which content to push. So which is why, something that I have learned from Canada, from the indigenous movements, that they give a lot of importance in building relationship. What you put, like if you start putting things against Israel, and they have significant technical capacities, particularly on the internet, we often forget that the whole creation of internet is actually a military space. Internet has and always been a militarized space. So obviously, when you have countries like Israel who have very advanced computational capacities, you and I
Yeah.
all know the recent event of Pegasus, an Israeli company. You and I know that this company is actually probably working right now on your cell phone. It's like literally listening to all of your conversation. So in Canada, the indigenous movement, they give a lot of importance in building relationship offline,
Yeah.
talking to people, getting to know people. Relying on online media to some extent is not very wise. How do you feel about Afghanistan, what is happening right now personally, and what do you think the world knows about Afghanistan? I'm sure that you have a lot of friends in Sweden who are Afghans, or refugees who are Afghans. How do you feel about it?
I feel, yeah, you're saying so many interesting things here, and yeah, definitely. Well, I feel it's difficult to manage your emotions all the time. Like it's and being an activist, I dedicated like a few years, almost my whole life to activism. But to be an activist in the long run, I realized, okay, I have to balance it somehow. And, being fed all this. So I have a lot of direct connections with people in Gaza, which I privately get a lot of information from. And it's horrible, but it's almost like, and I don't like when people say that, but it's numbing a little bit when you see just the same kind of pictures all the time. And it's as horrible to see the bombings and the dead people, but it's to not break down yourself and to continue doing it. You have to sort of just distance yourself a little bit. And I have people very, very close to me, from Afghanistan who now lives in Sweden. I know of a couple of people who are there right now. And yeah, Afghanistan is on the news every single day. So in a strange way, I have distanced myself because I know, and in my mind, I'm thinking more, and that's a sort of like natural thing. When something happens, okay, what can we do? What can I possibly do? I see a lot of difference in the movements here, the solidarity movements, support movements, and the Afghan cause is so much harder to support, because who are you supporting? What groups are you supporting? What solutions are there? I mean, that's so for me, the difference is when it comes to Palestine, I know what to do. It's clear. No one can argue that the Palestinians are not oppressed.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, and the history that is so long, but so, and I guess it's also a part of the history in Sweden of socialism and left-wing movements that has supported Palestine, and we have Olof Palme and prominent people who have stood up for Palestine. But when it comes to Afghanistan, it's totally different. We don't have this sort of long-term rooted movements that the same people who supported South Africa is now supporting it. So it's very, very difficult. And so every time I see the news, I'm just thinking, okay, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? Who can I talk to? Who can I network with? Because as you say, it's connections, and that's, I mean, what I'm trying to do is to always build my network with interesting people from all over the world who just stands for human rights. And I wanted to actually mention that earlier when it comes to the narrative. I don't know, as you said, we don't know about the algorithms, but what and in any conversation, I'm just trying to simplify why I support Palestine. It's because of basic human rights. And I'm sort of a little bit sensitive when it comes to who I oppose and what I oppose. And I'm for liberation of Palestinians. I'm for basic human rights. And a lot of people don't even want to have an opinion. They don't want to talk about Palestine and Israel because they don't want to take a stand. They don't want to choose a side. They don't want to get involved because it's too difficult. And yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do all the time. Talk about it in a simple way. When it comes to Afghanistan, I don't have an answer. Here we're having, rallies, demonstrations, but I just don't know, actually. I'm having my hopes for international, leaderships and the UN, but it feels kind of, I guess it's because it's happened so quickly. I mean, everyone was taken by surprise. The mobilization, organization, networking takes time. So yeah, well, it's hard to even say anything.
Absolutely. You mentioned something about activism, and absolutely there are a ton of literature of activism burnout. And I have seen it myself. Like you, I have been involved into social justice activism as an educator, as the whole point of me teaching for over 2 decades, I understood that I used to, in Bangladesh when I was there, I used to teach economics. At one point, I started feeling so frustrated when I was teaching Western, neoliberal, very capitalistic notions to my students that, oh, what are the advantages of market economy? The questions are out, to some extent. And I was thinking that, what do I do? I mean, what do I do? I mean, you, it was like tell you a joke that the British economists are writing about what's the development solution in Bangladesh or the Western, it's very, very colonialistic, very arrogant, very, white man's burden kind of attitude towards, not knowing something, but talking from a place of, that kind of arrogance. And of course, it creates that binary, right? That this is what has been the foundation of European colonialism, that we are the rational creatures, we are the rational people. We can see things objectively, hence, we have the superiority over the people of the places that we have colonized. And obviously, Bangladesh used to be a British colony for over 200 years here. So I'm very, very aware about the psychic colonization. And then I turned into other bodies of work, and I found, strangely, uh, a very powerful, empowering tool in Buddhism. So, and what I found basically was there all around, because, mind you, this is the Eastern philosophy, but obviously I was educated in Western discourses first, right? So, and I found out there's a difference between caring and curing. Our conviction of curing a problem comes from our self delusion that we have the capacity to cure something. But compassion is a capacity of heart that can be extended towards anyone, even knowing very well that person is actually dying. I read work like a lot of the Western and Eastern Buddhist philosophers, psychologists, writers. That's my self care. That's the way I stay sane to
Yeah.
understand. So there's a wonderful book. It's called The Edge States, and there the author explains a concept called empathic distress. When you look at something that is grotesquely brutal, dehumanizing, we experience a thing called empathic distress because you and I we have the power of feeling empathetic. But imagine if a doctor felt numb looking at a burnt patient, she would not be able to give the care that is needed for that patient. The patient may die in the process. But what empathic distress does, it creates a burnout in us, and we sort of don't want to see. Arundhati Roy, a very, very prominent Indian author that I absolutely love, in her last book, is that My Seditious Hurt, she writes something, is that her commitment to never look away from what is brutal, never to look away. Because, looking away gives us, and this is how I look at it, and I will never be shooting anybody in the world if I am in my senses, that, what they should do. So this is what helps me now, my coping mechanism, my books of sanity that I go back to again and again, is that when I see grotesque violation of human rights in any parts of the world, I look at it and I tell myself that, yeah, we do it. But also to actually slide into empathic distress, what it does, I mean, in a strange conversation, I heard from a neuroscientist that if you look at our brain structure, it let's say that if you brought a scientist, if you brought a, let's observer from a different planet, let's say from Mars, they would look at our brain, they would look at our activities, and they would see a evolutionary fault that humans have evolved to destroy themselves. Humans.
Right. Mm.
Yeah. And humans live in two realities simultaneously. One is fictional reality, fictitious, created by such a thing is that Ellen is Swedish. What does it even mean? It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Ellen is a white woman. What does it even mean? But it will make a difference whether you deserve to live or not, these fictitious realities that you are American. I mean, and now I'm an immigrant in Canada, so I have my immigration status here. If I did not have an immigration status here, I would not be considered for many of the rights that I enjoy, be it my health, be it my rights for education, or many rights, because I came as an international student.
Yeah.
So I can see the stark difference. I mean, ask anybody who is a refugee in Sweden right now, what was their mental state before they get the refugees, the immigrants status? I don't know what exactly you call that in Sweden, and become a Swedish or
Yeah. Yeah.
permanent
Or
residence.
permanent residency. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
residency. Yeah.
yeah. That's a darn piece of paper,
I
but
know.
that
Yeah.
stupid, disgusting piece of paper can be someone's nightmare.
Mm.
So I mean, and if you look at it, yes, humans have evolved, and it's a faulty evolution in our brain. We are walking to our collective doom hand in hand. So
Yeah.
Rabindranath, the only Bengali philosopher and poet. Not that I don't think Nobel Prize means something huge. Aung San Suu Kyi also got Nobel Prize. So
Yeah.
I'm not stuck on it. But if you say that Rabindranath got Nobel Prize, people recognize him. Oh, it must be a brown man who got Nobel Prize in literature. Well, Rudyard Kipling also got Nobel Prize for writing. He also wrote disgusting poems like White Man's Burden. He got Nobel Prize too, right? So I don't know
Yeah.
what that means. So the idea, one of the last essays of Rabindranath, actually there was the last essay, is that the crisis of civilization. When he was 80, on his 80th birthday, it was read by a close friend of his. He wrote in that essay where he said, in his youth, he believed that the civilization of humanity and all of that, probably the sun will rise from the west. But towards the end of his life, seeing two world wars, seeing West's mindless brutality, Europe's culpability in committing genocide and crime, he was very heartbroken. And he wasn't sure towards the end of his life that you can expect that. So, I mean, this is not a question, but probably standing in solidarity with you, shoulder to shoulder, one human to another human, to be able to understand that how do we make sense of human suffering? How do you make sense of human suffering, right? So, and that's I mean, this is one of my favorite books. The Most Dangerous Animal. This is the author that I was talking about when I said I had conversation with David Livingston Smith. He studies dehumanization. That's it. That's what he studies.
Very
So
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So what you see, I mean, talk about you. You feel peaceful inside, and you feel happy, and I could hear it from you saying it, that the good fortune of growing up in that socialistic environment, leftist, left-leaning human right sort of an environment. But look at what is happening in Sweden. Look at what's happening all of Europe. Like
Yeah.
the rise of far right groups, and you have a very interesting comedian in Sweden who is the leader of a party, Swedish Democrats.
Yeah. Swedish
Jamie,
Democrats. Yeah.
Jamie, what's his name again? Jamie.
Jimmy Åkesson.
Yeah, Jimmy
Yeah.
Åkesson. In in a BBC interview, he was openly saying is that Swedish society is breaking. Imagine the depth of his racist attitude.
Yeah.
Imagine. And he is the head of a party. He's saying that Swedish society is breaking down because of Muslim immigrants.
Yeah.
He there was no sign of shame on his face. He was saying in a very flat face.
No,
Now,
that's conviction. He's very
yeah,
convinced this is happening.
Ellen,
Yeah,
you live
yeah,
there. You live
yeah.
there. You have grown up there. Um, you have studied music. You have lived in London for some time. You have seen Brexit, and you have seen that how the entire Brexit was on the idea of take back our country. And
Yeah.
this comedian also doing the same thing in Sweden is that the Muslims are destroying Swedish society. Sometimes what happens, hearing these leaders, we slide into depression thinking all Swedes think that way. Sometimes we fail to see that governments are not people. There are millions of Americans who have been compassionate, understanding, caring for human rights all over the world. At the same time, it was American government that bombed Vietnam,
Yeah.
that has been bombing Afghanistan. It is the same American government that is supporting Israel for so long. Help us understand, you who grew up in Sweden. I don't essentially call anybody that country is like, I don't think you're Swedish. You are a human being. You have a piece of paper that probably is called Swedish passport. Help us understand the atmosphere of Swedish political climate for those who don't know about Sweden and Islamophobia in Sweden.
So growing up, I thought that Sweden was the best country in the world.
Just as any country.
Yes, we were safe. Haven't been to war for hundreds of years. We have the best school system, everything. And then in my early 20s, I realized, okay, this is not really the case anymore, as anyone else. But it was when I was living in London and watching it from outside. I lived there for 5 years. That's quite a lot of time to be away from the environment here. Suddenly this whole illusion just cracked when I saw on the news, that the Sweden Democrats were growing to be in the parliament. Can you imagine? In the 90s, they were wearing swastikas on their arms. Like, what is happening? And then since, it's been about 10 years now. Like, I mean, the development is growing very sort of in the shadows. And just, it's people usually forget that they're not that big. They have about just a few percent of the voters, but because Jimmy Åkesson is a very loud person, a very charismatic person, he's a lot in the media. He's a lot of things happening with people from his party that they get into fights, they hit people with iron things. It's so what you see from outside of the parliament is not really the reality. But I would say there are a lot of factors. People are, in a simple way, and from my point of view, people are growing to be more and more individualistic. That is one of the main reasons. Kids growing up, they want to get a job, earn a lot of money, get the latest iPhone. They don't give, they don't give anything to, to help someone else. Like, I mean, people can live their whole lives in Sweden and never, meet a refugee or meet a homeless person, or even, they look the other way. They turn off the news when it's something uncomfortable. I mean, it's possible for people to live their whole lives like that. And so I think, and it may sound very, I don't know, idealistic or whatever, but I think education is the key to everything. It starts with our kids. We have to educate our kids to care about each other, to care for people who are less fortunate. I mean, and I think looking at just my city, the gentrification here, the segregation, the whole system is going the wrong way, really. And this is only the tiny, tiny, tiny country of Sweden, where we have around 10 million people, which is not a lot if you compare to other countries. So, if you take that as just one example and blow it up and look at countries like the United States, I mean, there is so interconnected everything. And I think people, so what is going on with the right-wing movement is that people are unhappy. People are unhappy with their job situation, with, politics or anything. And that makes them, and also they don't come with this basic values from growing up, or from, maybe they've never been in an environment where you talk about society or values or basic things like human rights, and world issues. So then it's easy for them. When Jimmy Åkesson says that refugees come to Sweden and they take the money from the elderly care, and they post pictures of, which is often false information. They take some random picture and they post it, and they say our elderlies are starving because they don't get any food. If someone who is not educated enough or aware or interested in knowing things for a fact, they would just buy that argument. And they and believe me, if I can post something about the attacks in Afghanistan, or in my area where I live, there is a growing of, I live in a little bit outside the city, a city center, so criminality is growing here. And I post something about a shooting, and then they say, oh yeah, but they're all scums. They're just, it's a bad area to live in. We should just, make the, punishments worse. We should, make it's so counterproductive. And I always try and argue, but come on, if you cut all the resources to the kids growing up here, they don't have anything to do. It's so simple and easy solutions, but people don't want to see that. They just want to see, okay, these are bad people, these are good people, and that's it. So my answer to, to creating a better society is educating our kids and putting resources in the school system. And also, I'm part of an organization in Sweden which works with community organizing. We need to be open to each other. We need to be interested in each other as fellow human beings, because we're supposed to live in this world together. side by side, and we're supposed to do something good with our future, which is going really in the wrong direction right now. And I don't see any other way than just trying to work towards more unity amongst each other. And this with Islamophobia and whatever is just bad knowledge, interest, and not knowing anything. If you're buying the arguments that the right wing is saying that the immigrants are the reason to all problems in Sweden, then you're not you're not educated enough, because it's completely wrong. Yeah.
Ellen, here's the other challenge which I have found, which is part of my own research or dissertation, is that people in my research area would say that right now we are going through reality vertigo. It's very hard for us to know what to believe and what not to believe. Because, so a very famous philosopher and, a scholar from Oxford, Floridi, he has written a book. It's called Infosphere. So his argument is that we now live in a time where we live in the ocean of information. There was a point in time in history. Think about the history of Europe. Not everybody was allowed to read. Not everybody had the right to be educated. You had that system. But now we live in a time of massive capitalization, neoliberal capitalism, that where you have 8 people who own more wealth than half of the world. 8 people. What's happening in Europe is not different from what's happening in Bangladesh or in America or in Canada or in any parts of the world. The income inequality is increasing too fast. And then you have the former American comedian Donald Trump. What he did, he wrote, "Oh, the election was stolen from us." Imagine the most militarily mighty country in the world, nearly 500,000 people marched to US Capitol. There was an insurrection in a country that is the military might of the world. It has happened. So what's happening right now, and there's a wonderful book and 2 scholars from University of Toronto, OISE, they're talking about a thing is that your emotion is being weaponized. We're going through a time where we are going through an episode of politics of emotion. There was never ever a time. You see, if you look at the brain structure, our neocortex, the part that actually thinks things through, is a smart brain, but it's slow. But our emotional brain, our dumb brain, is very fast. So that's where our evolutionary fault. That's where our evolutionary, it's like almost we are doomed. We are doomed to our collective annihilation. Is that because your emotional brain, in order to, when you're talking about education, Ellen, I beg you also to talk about it. And also, we have a we have a literacy program in Bangladesh. If you think that your education system, that is corporate, that is neoliberal, is going to teach the children to learn to read the world, we are deluding ourselves. Because you see, Louis Althusser, a famous French sociologist, education has always been a means of indoctrination, not to make you thinker. Because if you learn to think, so there's a difference between reading a word and reading the world. You can't learn to read the world by mechanically reading the textbooks. And if we think that our education system is going to teach us, I am telling you, being a teacher and a parent, I'm a father. I tell my teenage son, what you just have mentioned, that our teenagers, our children are not interested, they're becoming individualistic. But at the same time, loneliness is a global public health crisis right now
Mm. Yeah.
because we have become narcissistic. We have
Yes.
become so self obsessed. Our children literally feel devastated if they don't have, I don't know, 5,000 followers on their Instagram or 2 million likes on their social media feeds. So in the contest of popularity, they forget the invaluable resource they have inside them, their spiritual wealth. I'm not sounding any hocus pocus new agey. No, I am very, very political. But the thing is that if you become the center of your existence, you will be hurled into loneliness.
Mm.
I mean, I mean, I don't know. The scholars that came out of the concentration camp, they have talked about it. The famous book, Man and His Search for Meaning, where,
Mhm.
the central argument is that if you don't have a deep meaning in your life, you and I will distract ourselves with pleasure, with sports, with fancy phone. It's not very long ago it has been said. But what's happening? Our children, the young generation, are literally distracted, and this is what we are not understanding. For the first time in the history of humanity, the moment you hold this device in your hand, $1 trillion worth of computational resources are at work to distract you because your emotion is a commodity that can be sold. Your attention is the most profitable commodity. And that is what I say again and again to my students, to organizers. And I'm telling also you, requesting you to tell this to your community organizers, is that let us learn from the indigenous people. Indigenous people give enormous importance in building relationship. You have
Yeah.
5,000 friends in Facebook, they're not your friends. You have people, they're connected to you on Facebook. Fariha Jamal from Washington DC. Thank you, Fariha. Her uncle was a great journalist, worked at the Viewer. I'll get in touch with her. I'll send her a message. Is that, imagine the kind of digital literacy that we need to create if we want to build some kind of solidarity, or else we are doomed. So this is what my crazy philosophy is, that even if we are walking hand in hand to our collective annihilation till the moment we end it all, what else can we do other than trying?
Mm. Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
very true.
Yeah, Rabindranath said it. Losing hope in humanity probably is one of the gravest sin. You and I are
Mm.
humans. You can't lose hope in humanity.
No.
Otherwise, I don't know. Otherwise, we'll slide into this, idealistic depression. Ellen, what are some of the messages you would like to give to young people, to the end of our conversation, is that things that you have learned working as an activist, things that you have learned, living and working in different countries, um, things you have learned from probably music, working with the refugees. What would you want to say to young people who are aspiring to be an activist, who have compassionate heart, who have not slid into empathic distress, that what they can do to care for the collective and care for the self?
Wow. Now I got a bit, I have to think about some wise words to say. So one thing that I've learned looking at my own journey as an activist is that being a hopeless optimistic helps. When people are started to be pessimist, it increases my optimism, because come on, there are, if you look at the world, yes, there is so much struggle and pain and darkness, but there are also so much hope and brightness and art and music and unity. I mean, that's something that can't weigh us down. So trying to look at positive sides and also read and learn about about campaigns and revolutions and projects that actually was successful, and also look long term. What I had to learn a lot is that things doesn't happen overnight. To make a real fundamental changes takes time and determination, and you're gonna struggle with 99% of the time with zero resources. You have to be creative, and that's when it comes to unity. Unite with other people, because then you can come together with your resources, your competencies, your knowledge, your skills. Be humble. Always be humble. And these are things I'm working on, all the time. Like, no one is perfect. You have to always, sort of look at yourself and give yourself feedback. What can you do to be better? But be humble to all situations. Always be open, because through my experiences as an activist, I got to travel to places I never would have gone to. I got to meet people from all over the world. I mean, just going to visit a refugee camp here in Sweden, the stories, the people, the experience, the knowledge, it's amazing. It's mind-blowing. And I wouldn't, change my experience for anything else, because this has given me so much back. And I meet people who ask me, okay, but I could never do what you do. How do you have the energy? How do you have the time, the spirit, everything? And it's because, I keep going because I get so much back. Just getting a message from someone in India, which I met a few years back when I was there, it's special. It's a connection that was made. And just be open to learn and listen and just check in as much as possible. I think that is invaluable for the rest of your life, and it makes you grow as a person. And also, now this, I'm gonna try and not sound like, just talking about, but I mean, I had to work on a lot of my prejudices, prejudices in situations towards people. Even if you say it and you think you don't have any prejudice, I think everyone does,
If you're a human.
Inevitably, you're a human. But really, I'm, just trying to be open and, talk to people that has, other opinions than you, is very, very, you learn so much from that. I think those were my words.
Thank you, Ellen. And thank you, our audience, for being with us. And we will end our conversation here today. Ellen, can you stay back for just a few minutes, probably?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me and listening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.